Hey class, we're going to talk about literary naturalism right now. All right, so think about this in terms of realism. So realism was this idea that we're going to present, uh, in literature, we're going to present a story that is realistic. And as we talked about last week, that's actually a fairly radical idea that that literature could be anything but fantastic. So, because once you start writing realism, then you have real people as the characters, and people are flawed. So you have flawed characters. You may even have plot lines that don't resolve in a satisfying way because real life doesn't build to some grand climax that like literature does. So, for instance, in Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, you have our main character, Peyton Farquhar, and he has, if you read the story, he has apparently sabotaged this bridge, or attempted to. Very poor attempt. And he's caught. Now, normally in a piece of literature, this would rise to some sort of climactic point where he's on the bridge and he's about to be hanged and he gets free and he swims away and there's his wife and he gives her a big hug. And Bierce then jerks that away from you at the very last second. Like, haha, you don't get this because realism doesn't build in this really satisfying and fake way. Realism builds like real life, and in real life, the rope doesn't magically snap. So our character, Farquhar, is hanged. Plus, also, I mean, here's a guy who is sabotaging a bridge. This may not necessarily lead to the death of enemy troops. He's, he's attempting to do something that could have led to the loss of innocent lives. He's not necessarily a good guy, although he appears to be pretty okay, and he thinks he's doing what's right for his country. But there's some evidence that, I mean, we don't know. I mean, he's a southern plantation owner. Is that necessarily good? I don't know. Okay, so often though in works of literary naturalism, so how does naturalism differ from realism? Well, one of the ways in which it differs is the focus is not going to be, so realism, here you have Peyton Farquhar, who is this, I mean, yes, he's a normal guy, but he is a plantation owner. Well, naturalism, they're going to focus in more sharply on the lower class. And you're going to have a greater likelihood of darkness or violence in the story. So it will be grittier often than regular realism. Yeah, I think you'll see that in The Open Boat. It is grittier in many ways than even that, the story at Owl Creek Bridge, which is rather dark, ends in the main character being hanged. There is a grittiness and a darkness to The Open Boat that's a little different. Okay, and the role of nature in general. So you're going to see nature presented differently. There's more of a focus on nature and its role in naturalism, whereas in realism, nature may not even be directly mentioned. I'm thinking about another one of my favorite beer stories is a story called Chickamauga, and in that, nature does not really play a role, other than it's the setting. But in The Open Boat, it absolutely does play a role. And what you're going to see is that nature tends to be powerful and destructive, but most importantly, indifferent. So nature is not personified in naturalism. Now, characters in naturalism may perceive nature as personified, but nature itself is not personified. Nature doesn't think about, I'm going to zap you with lightning or anything like that. Nature just, we have lightning bolts going off, but nature doesn't think. Nature is not a thinking, reasoning being as often it's presented as in Romanticism. No, nature is destructive and powerful, but ultimately indifferent to humanity. And that's a key distinction. And finally, you have this idea of a lack of choice. So think about it this way: as we're talking about a time when they're just now starting to puzzle out ideas of how species change, and there's this idea that if we are all sort of products of our genetics, then we may not really have as much autonomy as we feel like we have. And so one of the things you're going to see in naturalism is this sense that we are products of our environment, we are products of our genetics, and we may be on these lines that we can't see, these paths that we can't see, and while we may have the illusion of choice, we don't have any real choice. All right, so those are some key differences between literary realism and literary naturalism.